extended title here is The Journey Towards Changing Towards a Sustainable Food System and Where You Must Fit In. I once made the acquaintance of a very fine fishmonger in an international grocery store in Tucson, Arizona. And maybe you're not equating a landlocked state and great fish. I understand that. But this guy knew what he was doing. His name is Yuri Rabayev, and he was from Azerbaijan. Yuri knew fresh fish. He knew where it came from. He knew when it was harvested in a sustainable manner, and he knew which fish was endangered. And when you ate the fish that he shepherded from oceans distant and close, you felt good. Yuri told me stories about how he was a dairy engineer in the former Soviet Republic, and he made mostly butter and sour cream. He told me how they made a very special rich sour cream just for party members, who incidentally didn't have to pay. And then everybody else got the average stuff. He also told me how they raised a calf in the basement of their apartment building illegally so that his family could have fresh kosher beef. Yuri emigrated to the United States about 20 years ago, away from political and religious turmoil. Yuri knows fish, he sells fish, he ends up in Arizona. How did a Soviet bloc dairy engineer end up doing that? It kind of defies logic. But what I know is that Yuri educates people about fresh fish. He knows everything about those fish. And when he talks to you, he entertains you, he laughs, and he heals you. Yuri's undertaken a real journey, and he's found out what he's supposed to be doing. On my first encounter with him, picture a guy tall with a broad nose and curly black hair and a somewhat sideways smile. I asked him if he had any fish bones. "What are you going to do with those?" he demanded. I said, "I'm going to make soup." He yells down the counter to his Chinese coworker, "Hey, the American guy, he wants some fish bones. He must know what he is supposed to be doing." And so after having announced that to the entire store, an older couple began following me around and looking at every strange food item I put in my cart. "What are you going to do with that?" they'd ask, having no idea that I didn't know what to do with that can of green grass jelly. 20 years ago, I ate in a Malaysian restaurant in New Haven, Connecticut. I remember the dish, I remember its brick red color, a slightly gritty texture, and a mysterious flavor, at once woody and smoky and kind of like eucalyptus. And I asked the server what it was that special ingredient, but it wasn't anything special to him. He couldn't explain it, and maybe I couldn't put it to words. So I never did find out what that substance was. Years later, I was eating saag paneer at an Indian restaurant in Omaha, and I tasted that flavor again. This was becoming one of the most enduring mysteries of my life. And then last year, at a small Indian shop in Lincoln, I looked in the refrigerated case, and there was a delicate twig with small leaves on it, and it was carefully wrapped in plastic. And I opened that up, and I smelled it. I do that sort of thing. I'm an explorer. And I smelled it, and that was it. I'd finally found out. All these years, that flavor that haunted me was curry leaf, Muraea tonegii, also called sweet neem leaf. It loses its aromatic properties soon after it's picked. You have to cook with it right away. And the fact that it has alkaloid constituents that have been found to reverse carcinomas is an extra blessing after the flavor. So how does a chemist like me from Vermont clean up mines in the desert Southwest and end up here in the Midwest running a brewery and a restaurant? The answer, I undertook a journey that I thought was about bicycle racing, which turned into a career in environmental cleanup, which then turned to teaching and finally to brewing. I guess you could say I'm figuring out what I'm supposed to be doing. Every step I take brings me closer to that destiny. If you asked me when I was 10, what did I want to be when I grow up, which I think is a toxic question asked by people who don't know the answer themselves, I would have said astronaut. 10 years later, I would have said a scientist. And 40 years later, I say, I don't know. What does it mean to grow up? Uno nunca sabe, the saying goes, one never knows. When I was 50, I changed careers. I thought I was having a midlife crisis. My counselor said there was no such thing. That was good news for me. I liked hearing it. It challenged me to go on figuring out what was happening with me, and she urged me not to ask why so much. And I decided I wouldn't label my condition with some quasi-disease. And I also decided I wasn't going to buy a motorcycle. I evaluated my experiences. I kind of laid all the cards on the table, and it was pretty clear to me that I should be running a brewery. When I first moved to the Midwest, I didn't know that. But I met a guy who curated the beer list at a local bar, and I don't remember if it was he or I, but we decided together that we were going to have a beer and cheese tasting. And we'd invite people, and it would be a thing. And so I contacted some local cheesemakers, and I talked to Krista Dittman, who I didn't know. I guess I just got her name off the internet. And I said, hey, you know, we're doing this thing. I'd like to learn something about your cheese. Without even knowing me, she came over to my house with a cooler of these most amazing cheeses. And I went down and I poured us each a Munich dark style lager that I'd brewed. And the two of them, the beer and the cheese, met like old friends. That's when I knew she knew what she was supposed to be doing. And that's when I said, me too. You know, so the next thing that happened was I went to the Dittman's farm and I started making cheese there. And that led to us serving her farmstead cheeses at our brewery tap room. And now, in the latest turn of fate, Krista and her husband Doug are sitting in our tap room, drinking our beer, strategizing the opening of their new farm-to-table cafe that's going to be 3 blocks from us. It reminds me of the fathers of the Revolution who sat and drank ale at Boston's Green Dragon Tavern. They plotted revolution. And this is a revolution. This is a food revolution. And I feel right now the current of a cold, icy river that runs beneath the ice dam of corrupt politics and global petrochemical/food corporations and chain restaurants. And so at my business, we prepare wholesome and hearty food, focusing on local and sustainable ingredients. And we tell those stories to our customers. We brew beer without added chemicals, and we serve it without filtration. If we can run a brewery without ever bottling or canning our product into individual containers, we'll do so to avoid the resource and health issues that come from individual packaging systems. At our establishment, I'm pleased to take people on a tour of the brewery. And then I expose some of the hard truths about factory breweries and global economics and marketing lies and sustainable packaging. And not everyone appreciates having their beer bubble burst. But that's what I do. That's my job. It's part of my role towards healing people and encouraging them to think about what they eat and what they drink. You may have already figured out what your role in the sustainable food system is. Congratulations. You run an organic farm. You have a biodynamic operation that raises fresh chickens and eggs. You run a grocery store that sells local produce. Maybe you have a website that advises vegetarians where they can find a suitable meal. But maybe you're here today because you don't know exactly where you fit in, but that subtle voice has told you you're on a path, and you don't know where that path is leading. You don't know what your role is, but you believe it. That's great. Good job for listening to that guidance. And now you have to undergo a period of trial and error to find your niche. You must allow yourself the journey where you don't know the outcome. There are lots of sayings for this wise practice. One is let go and let God. One is surrender to what is, let go of what was, and have faith in what will be. But my favorite is let your faith be bigger than your fear. Faith is when you have complete trust in something without sufficient evidence. I'm a scientist. I don't subscribe to a particular religion, but as I define it, I can still have faith. I can still know that sometimes experience is best left unexplained. And fear is something that you encounter when you're searching for your role. And as you go further and further into identifying what it is that you have to do with our sustainable food system, you will have fearful moments. But remember that fear is a learned behavior, and as it can be learned, it can be unlearned. Remember the Buddha saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear? Trust me, that teacher, that he, that she, that experience, it will come. You know, it's never too late to find our place. Mozart was 4 when he discovered what he was supposed to be doing. Whistler was 80. I say anywhere in between is okay. The Tai Chi master, T.T. Liang, says, life begins at 80. That should give every one of us hope. My final point about finding out your role is this. You must bring it to others. If you buy local sustainable food and you eat it by yourself and you imagine that you're helping, my message to you is you're not taking a big enough bite. Revolution requires us to bring that change into the street. The Dalai Lama writes, our purpose in life is to help others, and if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. How can we hurt other people? By simply not resonating with this change. Remember, we're talking about sustainable food systems, the opposite of which, that we rarely label, is the non-sustainable food system. It's not healthy, it's not adequate, the American diet is not sustainable, it promotes disease, it promotes disproportionate wealth, it pollutes rivers and lakes, it drifts through the air, and it bioaccumulates in our tissues. Doing nothing right now to change that is to condemn yourself and others, present and future, to blight and disease and famine. If we don't each find a role and bring what we learn to others, we're failing in our duty as compassionate people. But please consider this. Thank you.